I'll call the meeting to order at 7 o'clock. Our speaker this evening is Glenn Buffington. He's a lifelong resident of the area and our family's very good friend for many years. His wife is Linda, their son is Matthew, married to Hillary, and they have 3 children, Layla, Benjamin, and Ellie. I'll turn the program over to Glenn.
Good? Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me, I think. They say about, one of the biggest fears people have is public speaking. And I wouldn't call it a fear, but I haven't done it very many times, so please bear with me as far as that goes. The reason I'm speaking tonight, Marilyn approached me a while back about doing a history of the quarry, because you've had presentations on some of the industries and businesses in town. And I said, for all the years I worked there and all your dad was up on the mountain, I really don't know about the history. You can get more out of the centennial books than you find out from me. So she said, well, she knew about my dad's war record and community service. So she wanted to just make it a tribute to your father. So I said, okay, that sounds good. I think I know him well enough to do that. So, I'll try to do him some justice. Back in 1998, Tom Brokaw from NBC News wrote a book entitled The Greatest Generation. And he wrote it because of his observations in 1994, the 50th anniversary of Normandy invasion. And it just struck him that people that did that, he started to think about how their lives progressed. They grew up during the Depression, fought the war, came home, went to work, built families, built a nation. And the thrust of his book is summed up in one sentence, and I quote, "It is, I believe, the greatest generation any society has ever produced," unquote. And I wholeheartedly agree. If you ever think of all the guys dad's age range, they did something unbelievable and just never asked for any recognition, accolades, or anything. You just went about your business. So, with that, we'll get started on the history of the family here. That's my ancestors, Daniel Frank Buffington, my great-great-grandfather, his wife Amelia Soliday Buffington, my great-grandfather Wellington Buffington, how's that for an all-British name? His wife Minnie Wagner Buffington, this is my grandfather Raymond. He was born in 1904, and his younger brother Roy. I don't know what year this was taken, but this house, I call it the Buffington Homestead. It's up, if you go outside of Gratz, the Soliday's one-room schoolhouse, and look down over the hill, you can see the roof line of this house that Daniel Frank built. And that's where the Buffington clan originated and was raised, where my grandfather grew up. That's the Soliday school that I was referencing. All the Buffington relatives went there, all the way up to my Uncle Dunning. I'm sure you all know him. He went to school there also. He was in the first graduating class back at the high school after it was built in 1959, but he also attended this, and that's my grandfather right there. 1910, so he was 6, probably first grade. That's my great-grandparents again from that earlier picture in their later years, Wellington and Minnie. And this is my father's maternal grandparents, Henry and Carrie Kuppenhaver. Her maiden name was Weiss. She was a cousin to Woodrow Weiss, Carolyn Cucker's father. So I'm a distant cousin of Carolyn. This is my grandparents, about 1960. He passed away in 62. He was 58 from minor's asthma. My grandmother passed away in 88. She was in an accident. She was 82. This is the homestead where my dad was raised. That's my grandfather. His mother Minnie. He bought this farm in 1929. It was 40 acres, and he paid. I got my notes mixed up. $1,200 for it in 1929. spring of 29, and we all know what happened in the fall of 29. And then the Depression hit, and they had nothing. He had to go into the mines and farm, and they had a rough. This is the only one I have of that house. No indoor plumbing, no electricity. You could see through some of the walls, the daylight through them. I know there was times my dad said him and his brother Russell, they were 16 months apart. They would wake up some morning, going to be snow on the bed. So just a little insight as to what it was like to grow up in the Depression. They were poor. This is a farm, probably about late 40s, early 50s. My grandfather built a chicken house there in the 50s, so that's not there yet. But the house was in considerably better shape by that time. But if you go up to Huffman's Hatchery, past the Gratz Drive, and turn back Picnic Road, and go to the T in the road, and go back to the lane here, you'll run into it. Earl Campbell bought it several years ago, and he has it rented out to the Amish family right now. That's my dad there. And my grandmother's holding his brother Russell, so this picture here is probably about 1925. Dad was born in 24, they're 16 months apart, so it's probably 1925. In the picture of them in the farm, how you like the knickers? With some of their cousins, that's Russell and that's Dad there. The one thing about growing up, I mean, they were poor and they didn't have much, but they hung together. I know Dad told one story about when they were younger. One night they went for supper, and my grandmother started to cry, and said, "What's the matter?" And all she had for him was potatoes. That's all she could make for supper. And he said when Christmas came around, if he got a pair of socks, he had a good Christmas. And if he got an orange, it was an outstanding Christmas. But that's the way it was growing up, and one of the main things that shaped his life and his outlook on life was growing up the way he did on the farm, working hard and not having any money, but hanging together as a family. Another shot of the family, that's Dad, and that's Russell. Of course, on the farm back then, it was all horses. They used horses to work, and one story Dad used to tell as far as, getting along with your neighbors and looking out for your fellow man back in those days with everybody being dirt poor and not having a lot. Russell and Dad would work the farm all day long, and it wasn't uncommon at the end of the day for their dad to come up there and say, "You go down the road tonight to Mr. So-and-so's farm, he's not feeling well, you put his hay away for him." And they do it. They didn't get paid for it, just went down and helped their neighbor. One of the things they did when they were kids, they raised beagles. They used to sell. They had a good reputation for selling really good beagle hunting dogs. That's a picture of him in high school. My grandmother used to tell me he was always very proud of his academics, and he was very serious about his studies. And she used to point out to me that there was always a pencil in his pocket. His graduation in 1941, he graduated from Hubley Township High School up there in Spring Glen. Robert Puppenaver, the contractor, has it now for a warehouse for his building supplies. And that's the three brothers. My dad and Russell, like I said, 16 months apart. And then 16 years later came Donnie. So he was a surprise to the family. But they were all three very hard workers. Dad worked at quarry and some farming on the side afterwards. Russell did the same. He worked some coal mines and construction. He wound up being a truck driver for most of his life. And Donnie, he was up here on the hill. He was one of the hardest workers I ever saw. He'd go home from work at the quarry and work till the wee hours, or the late hours, till dark at the farm. He married Floyd Fight's daughter, Betty, and they lived down below town. And then, of course, the next big thing that impacted my dad's life was when he got drafted in 1943. We all know about World War II and what all that was all about. These these two pictures here, my grandmother used to keep in a double-sided frame all the time. And what she would tell people, I still remember the first time she related the story to me, she said, look at this young man here. This is when he was first drafted. And this is when he came home from the war. And she said, look in his eyes and tell me you can't see a difference. And you can. And the reason that you can see a difference is what he went through, and this was some of it. I don't have any pictures from the war of, action pictures and stuff like that, because the troops didn't take pictures in battle and things like that. I have an album over there full of a lot of pictures of the war if you care to look through what I've done, but I just wanted to highlight, what some of the horrors of war, and the worst one he saw was this. This is an order of Germany, and this here really had an impact on him when he went in here. And you heard the stories about the concentration camps stacking up bodies like cordwood. He actually took these pictures, and he said when they got out of that concentration camp, him and his buddies were that mad if they'd have seen a German baby that they shot it. And I'm sure you've all heard the stories of General Eisenhower. When he discovered the concentration camps, he ordered the German civilians to go look at them. And I'm sure you've seen newsreels of the German citizens going through the camps and turning their heads away, and the troops making them look to see what their master race did. So not much more to be said about that. And this is another shot. It's about as close to a battlefield shot as I have. This guy isn't in this, but I thought I'd put it in there to display some of the scenes from the battlefield. This is what he did in the Army. He was in the 3rd Army. The commander was a guy by the name of George Patton. I'm sure you've all heard of him. But there's a battle map over there that shows their routes through Europe, and it has some of the other generals that commanded his outfit. So in the 3rd Army, he was in the 4th Army Division, which had a really good reputation as far as one of Patton's favorite divisions. And in one of those scrapbooks, there's some articles in there about how feared they were by the German troops, the 4th Armored Division. He drove a tank retriever, or he always called it a wrecker. He had 2 men on his crew. And like everything else, I kicked myself over and over with all the old pictures, especially the war pictures. I never sat down with him and made him label them. So a lot of these guys I don't know. I couldn't give their names. One of them's Steve, because there's his name on the fender. And if you look there, it says the Flying Dutchman, Buff. And, all us Buffingtons will always go by that nickname, Buff, and that's what he did in the Army also. They're going down the street, probably somewhere in France. The windshield's down on the record, Dad's driving it. He got his crew on there. There he is, standing on the side of it. Just a scene from one of the encampments. Plus, they also had times where they had downtime. They took every minute they could to enjoy their free time. They played a lot of baseball over there. They just find a field and set up a baseball field and start playing ball. And of course, over there's the beer mugs. And they also had real good relations with the locals over there. They always had, kids following them around and families inviting them to meals and things like that. There's lots of pictures in that album of French families and Belgian families that they made friends with. And here's one for you, one of the lighter moments of the war. Can anybody identify that guy? It's Bing Crosby. And that's somewhere on the front lines, probably in France. Bing Crosby came out to entertain the troops, and he got that shot on there. And just to show you some of my dad's best friends he had in the Army, this was at Fort Bliss, is where he got his basic training. This gentleman's name was Dave Whitlock. He lived up in Pittston. Him and Dad were very, very close friends. He stayed in his later years. And this guy here, I'm sure several people in here will know him when I say his name. Anybody want to guess? He's from Eville, or Berrysburg, I guess originally. That's Bob Lesher. He was our neighbor for years out here where I was raised. Him and Dad got to know each other. They were very close friends in the Army. And then in later years, after Dad built a house out there, Bob bought the land next to us, and he built there also. That's Bob and him in later years. And that was my dad's company commander, Captain W.W. Wilkins. That's on his spread down in Virginia. He had a couple, about 1,000 acres or so, a horse farm down there. Dad would have walked too far for that guy. He was something. And that's one of their first army reunions. There's Bob Lesher there. And again, I never made him label him, so I couldn't tell you who all the rest of them are. And this is a story that's close to my heart, and I hope I don't get choked up in telling this one. This was at Gettysburg in the year 1998. It was the year Dad got his diagnosis of terminal lung cancer. He never missed an army reunion. And he always would ask me, to come along, to bring the family and go along with the army reunions. We're always too busy, we always make excuses. Well, he got his diagnosis, and I told my wife and Matthew, I said, we're going to the reunion this year. Luckily, it was close, it was in Gettysburg. So Matt was he was 14. And a 14-year-old kid, just being told he was going to spend a weekend with a bunch of 75-year-old guys. He wasn't really into it. He knew better than to say no or try to say no, but he's I knew he was reluctant. So we went down to him and we hung out with these guys. And I just can't describe what it was like to see the admiration and the love they had for each other because of what they had been through together. And Sunday night when we went to come home, we pulled away from the hotel, and Matt was in the back seat, and he said, hey, can we come next year? I'll never forget that we did. And that was his last army reunion. That was a picture taken at that army reunion. There's his 4th Army Division. Okay, and the other, of course, what he's known best for around town is the quarry. Here's a picture of a crew in 1944. Now, he actually wasn't in this. He was in Europe fighting. But anybody know this guy?
Yeah.
You're not old. That's Jack Wirtz right there. That's Jack Wirtz. And I had had this picture, but I never knew who was in it. Then Marilyn actually found these names. And some of them, I'm sure something like Monroe Korsnitz, Albert Miller, talking of where he went by. And who's Jake Wirtz, Mike?
It would be, it was my dad's uncle.
Okay.
Jake used to run the water company, do all the water company work here in Elizabethville.
Yeah.
He was a constable.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Dave Rao's dad is there. Abe Rao?
Yeah, there's a Rao in there somewhere.
Right.
Abe Rao, yeah. Oh, next to your dad, right there.
Yeah. And Harry Unger was the school teacher. He was one of my teachers in high school.
What did I do?
Keep going.
I'm going backwards. Why am I going backwards?
Can you fix it then?
Oh, I got it now.
Yeah. Harry Unger is, I think, all the way on the left, the
Yes.
last person on the left.
And that's Jake Wirtz there, Monroe Korsnitz, Cocky Miller, Jack. And these are the Eversole brothers. Bill Eversole and Earl Eversole. Their dad, George, is the one that bought the quarry. And that's my extent of the quarry history. I know it was bought. It was opened in 29. George Eversole started it. And he also owned a farm over towards Enders that we lived on, since Dad was a foreman up there. But it was sold to Bill Fail in 1954. It was sold to Eastern in 1990. And sold to New Enterprise in 2008. And that's about it for my quarry history. Everything else is stories that I could relate, but they wouldn't sink in, unless, it was one of those things that had to be there. Dad and I and Tom Walker used to sit around all the time and say, we ought to write a book what goes on up here, but nobody would ever believe it. And I'm sure people that work in other businesses too have the same experiences.
Child labor laws were different. My father was 15 in that photo,
Okay,
and he was digging to put dynamite in a hole.
right? Well, yeah, that's one thing I wanted to show you. I'm going to go back. I'm going forward.
I got you.
Anyway, there was a hole in that picture. Yeah, go back there. They used to fire what they called coyote tunnel shots. And they would dig a hole like that into the solid rock face, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 feet back in. And then they would do 2 side tunnels off of that, however long they wanted to make the shot. And then they would take dynamite and pack it full from the ceiling to the floor of the ceiling until they brought it out to that opening, and then they'd pack it full of sand. And they'd set it off like that. And then you would have nothing but boulders when we do that. Then they had to go in with air hammers and drill the boulders and stick sticks of dynamite in the boulders, and that's how, the guys that work in quarries now would never tolerate what those guys had to do. And Dad was a jack of all trades. He welded, he was a mechanic, he was very good at welding and blasting, which I have a blasting story to tell you about him. That was something he was very proud of, his expertise at blasting. And of course, right after he got started at the quarry, he was working on the road one day over by Federhoff's Church, and somehow met a young girl that lived in that house there, whose father was a carpenter. Harry Nobbert was his name. And they started courting in 1949. They tied the knot. That's Federhoff's Church over there. It's my mom Ethel. And just some pictures from those days when, about the time him and Mom got together. That picture was up at the farm. There's one the dashing young man with his car, the old car, whatever model it is, I don't know. And then of course the scene from the quarry, he could run equipment. Like I said, he was a jack of all trades. He did about everything, including foreman. Winter time they'd be out plowing snow. That's a little bulldozer, and if you ever plow snow with a bulldozer, it's not fun. But I think that's, if you look back there, I think that's Blood Mountain. And of course Berry Mountain there, so I think that's over in the next valley somewhere. And it was a deep snow. You can see the year was 58. But I remember, some years, you guys all knew Paul Lebo, probably from down below town. I know Paul would be out sometimes 3 days in a row without any sleep plowing the snow. Just a shot of Dad doing welding. That's a trade he taught my brother and I. And we all three enjoyed it a lot. Now and there, that's Dad at the quarry. I mean, everybody knew his big LTD station wagon. He never wanted to pick up. He liked his station wagons. He used to carry dynamite in that thing, and if he would have got caught, I would have had to go see him through a plate of glass. But somebody got a hold of this picture one time up at the R&K Diner and put it on the bulletin board and put a wanted sign above it. That was him, and he enjoyed his work. So it's tough to see it with the old photo. He had a big grin on his face like he usually always did. He was active in the National Stone Association. That's him receiving a safety award there in one of the conventions. I mentioned the Eversoles that owned the quarry. They also owned that farm over. If you go over towards Enders and turn on, is that Rudder Road? Those areas? Yeah, turn left on Rudder, get down to the creek and turn left the first farm you come to on the left. The Eversoles owned that because he was a foreman. They left him live on that farm, but he also worked it too. So that was the farmhouse. I wasn't born yet when they lived there. They started off in Gratz up on Main Street. That's where Barb was born in the home on Main Street, Gratz. And they went to this farmhouse, and then when Eversoles sold, they moved back to Kenny Cucker's farm on the house that's across the driveway from Chris and Wanda Cucker. We used to live. That's where I was born when they were back there. And then from there he built the house where Mom is now. That's just working the fields on the Eversole farm. There's Broad Mountain in the background. And of course, there's his proudest accomplishment was family. Like I said in the beginning, Dad was a humble man. He didn't brag much on himself, but he made up for it bragging on his boys and his wife. And that's me. So this is 1950. Oh no, this is February. It should be 57. Rod was 6 years older than me. That's a story too. You know, when I was born in 56, Mom, I don't know if she was pregnant yet or not, but they were riding in the car one night, and they didn't have a TV yet. And Rod said, "Hey, Dad, you know, I think we could get a television." And I said, "No," he said, let me check it out and do some shopping. Maybe we can get you a television. So after he said that, supposedly Rod said, "Well, while you're at it, how about a baby brother too?" So I don't know if you tell the story. I was a package deal with a TV. A year later, he found his pony that Rod and I fell in love with, and he gave it to us for Christmas. And we were up at my grandparents' farm up there in Gratz, and it was bitter cold that night, and the horse was out in the barn, and Mom didn't want us going out there in the bitter cold, but my grandfather told my dad, "Bring that pony in the house." There he is. In the farmhouse. There's my Uncle Donnie right there. Rod and I ride the pony. And there's the home I'm sure you're all familiar with, where I was raised, out there across from Flea Flicker. And the only thing different is the picture window's been replaced. That's about it. That's when it was being built. That's the front. This is where the picture window is. You can see how much fill was put in the front of it. And he built it himself. He bought the land, built the house for $10,000. We moved in, I think, in '61. But then another caveat was he was only making 75 cents an hour, too. So $10,000 was a pretty hefty bill. But that's one thing that I learned from many things I learned from my parents. My mom was very frugal. She used to put every cent she could get back and put an extra on the house payment. And she paid the mortgage off well before the due date. That's looking through the picture window towards Montongo Mountain over there. That's Dad, and there's Rod. And that's me helping build a house. That's looking from the south side of the house, through the house. There's a Montongo Mountain there through all the lumber. And I couldn't do anything, you know, a tribute to my father without including my mother heavily in it also. The best word to describe them for me is they were a team. I think it was truly a match made in heaven, and the love and respect they had for each other was always very evident. My brother and I never heard them raise their voice to each other. I never heard the other one complain about the other one. We had a very positive example. A marriage is the way a marriage should be. That was the 25th wedding anniversary in 1974. And with Dad, with all his work, if Mom did complain about anything, it was that he was always working. So one year my brother and I got together. He was married at the time, I wasn't. Rod said to me, "Let's get him a trip. If we buy him a trip and give it to him for a Christmas present, then darn it, he's got to go." So that's what we did. We bought him a trip to Nashville, and he did it. You know, when the time came, as much as he could forget about the quarry, he did, and they went off to Nashville. They went, and we got something started because he really enjoyed his trip, and then we did a lot more traveling after that year. And that's just another typical shot of their marriage. Watching them together, like I said, the only thing I can say is they were a team, and the picture of contentment, I guess, is the best word. They were very contented with each other. Of course, Dad was very active in the community, and one of the main things people remember for was the school board. This is the board that was in place. This is from the middle school dedication pamphlet. When the middle school was dedicated, and with the recent death of Lynn Henninger, there's no survivors on this picture. They're all gone. But Dad used to, I remember some of the stories. He was the president of the board when the Likens merger was going on. If you've got anybody that remembers that, that was a bloody time for the school board. And I used to think to myself, how does he do it? And because of some of those things that I witnessed, that's one of the reasons I've been approached to get on the board. In In fact, a good friend of mine, Dave Barter, insisted that I get on with him one time, and I said, no way. But, that being said, with all of some of the fights that he had, and when he got off the board and would reminisce about it, he was always positive. He never held any grudges or any animosity. And in fact, I was telling Ed and Linda Beckles before the meeting that Lynn and my dad, who were always very good friends, but they used to fight tooth and nail because everything it seemed that my dad was for, Lynn was against. And it was always that way, but when the votes were taken and the decision was made, then they all got together and they proceeded. Imagine that, a government body getting along and doing what's best for who they're working for. Boy, oh boy. This is the insurance board Dad served on. Shoot, I did this right here. Like I said, I got my notes mixed up. I was winging it. Wyden Valley Mutual Insurance Company. And then later Yorktown Mutual Insurance Company. There's Bob Straub. What's that guy there? We all know. Bill Henninger.
That's Denny's dad.
Yep, Denny's dad. Turkey Hoover, Bob Straub. The other ones I don't know. This fellow's
John
Ford.
Ford.
Okay. I recognize the face, but I couldn't put a name to it. Every time, Dad loved the woods, but in his later years, his knees were giving out on him. He couldn't stomp around in the mountains like he wanted to, so he bought himself a four-wheeler, which shocked everybody that knew him because he hated motorcycles. And I was like, you have a four-wheeler? But the funny thing was, when he used to ride into the woods to come up to my house, when you see a four-wheeler going through the woods and on the roads, they're tearing up the place, doing everything up, Dad would come up probably at top speed of 15 miles an hour. And then when he got his Brittany Spaniel, he always wanted a Brittany all his life. And he bought and he named it Max. And when he would get the four-wheeler out, Max would come running to him and up on him, and legit he'd go. And he would take him to the woods that way too. And some of the travels they did in later years, that's who brought his brother Russell. That's at Indian Town Gap. This is the Battle of the Bulge Memorial. Like I said, he's very proud of his war record. I got the map over there if you want to look and see where they went, and a few souvenirs. There's a captured battle flag there. I didn't want to unfold it and let the swastika laying out there. I think you would appreciate that or not, but like I said, just part of the greatest generation. That's the best picture I have of them together. That group is there. Again, I was very blessed. I had wonderful parents. They set a great example. And one of the things I saved for last was the church. They were both grounded in the church, big time. And when Sundays came, Rod and I knew where we were going. It wasn't even a discussion. And in the olden days, we all remember Wednesday nights and all that stuff too. Wednesday nights was church nights, Sundays was church. Dad served in history, he was a Sunday school teacher, Mom was always helping the ladies with whatever. So I grew up with the church as a big part of my life because of that. And that's a family portrait. The judging from Matthew's age and Alicia's age, this is probably about 1986. And we lost my brother, I'm sure a lot of you know, in 1989 in a tragic accident. That more than anything hit them both. For me, it was hard personally losing a brother, but watching these two go through that, it's the pain that's indescribable. And it really affected them both very badly. That's my grandmother's 80th birthday in 1986. Her request for her birthday, for a present, was to have her entire family with her in church. So she went to church in Grass. We all went up to the service, but then we came down for a dinner at our church down the street at Salem. That's where this is. I'm sure you recognize it. And the whole bunch is there. There's my Uncle Bunny, Uncle Russell, and my dad, and all my cousins. And Alicia and Matthew. This is my dad's daughter Alicia. She's 3 years older than Matt and I. Will be 41 on Thursday. She'll be 44 in July. Her husband Tim, oldest son Henry, we call him Hank. Youngest son Max. They're 12 and thank you. And I guess Max is 8. And they live in Falmouth, Massachusetts. We try to get together with them whenever we can. And there's my pride and joy. Of course, Matthew, Hillary. Leah will be 16 in July. Benjamin was 12 in March. And our little surprise, Ellie, she was 4 in December. One of the biggest wishes if I could have a wish, I would like to see my dad be able to know these kids, because he would have gone absolutely crazy. This my son did for me for Father's Day one year. Probably my favorite picture of anything I have. 7 generations: Daniel, Frank, Buffington, Raymond, Leon, me, Matthew, and Benjamin. I think the life well lived, a good and faithful servant. Any questions?
How long did he work at court? What year did he?
He actually learned about his age to get a mixer driving job, or a truck driver. I don't think they had mixers then, before he was drafted. So I'm going to say 41. I think he started at 41. And these are all things, like I said, I could kick myself for not making them sit down with me and write this stuff down. But I know he was put there before he was drafted. And when he came home, he took some other odd jobs here and there, but then he went right back up. So all total, he's close to 50 years.
Now, you were in the quarry business too.
Yeah.
Little short summary of what you did and where you worked.
Well, trying to keep it as short as I can because there's so many factors that factor into what I did. I wanted to go to college. When I got out of high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And for well, it's a long story how I chose music, but I went to college for music, came back, didn't want to teach. I always loved the quarry because I worked in the summers.
Okay.
But anyway, went up there, and that was it. I was hooked. I started learning. Well, he taught me to weld. That was what put me on the path. And then I learned crusher mechanics from him because he was quite an expert on working on crushers. There's a brand new crusher called Nordberg that we have up here that the factory was out in Milwaukee, and the service people that he used to talk to on the phone about the machines, they would actually refer other quarries to him to work on their machines because they didn't have enough technicians. And they would tell him, we got this guy in Harrisburg that knows the machines, and he's not certified, but he'll help you. And he actually went to some other quarries around the state working on machines. So I picked up, a lot of the crusher mechanic from him. When Eastern came around in 1990, wasn't too happy there, and I went down to Pennsy and found a home down there. I was at Pennsy for 18 years. I loved it down there. Absolutely loved it. As much as I loved the Evo quarry, I found a home at Pennsy. And then things changed down there. They went big corporation, and I lost the family flavor again. Wasn't content anymore. Then I took a job at Union Quarries in Carlisle in 2009. I was actually the president of the company, but they hired me for my operation experience. I wasn't any kind of executive. In fact, I'd be in a corner office, and I'd put my steel toes on and go out in the plant. And the lady that was there before me, she stayed on to do the books. And she said, "You're going to get us in trouble with our insurance company. You're supposed to be in the office." I said, "Well, forget that." But the pressure of that job got to me. I take things to heart too much, and I could feel it right here and right here. I had to get out of that management job. And when I turned 60 in 2016, I gave that up, and then took a job at MI just to keep me going, and then an equipment company that I was actually a customer for called me up one day and said, hey, you come work for me and sell crushers. So I did that, and I told him, I said, well, I'm 65, I'm totally done. And he didn't believe me. I did crusher sales for 3 years, and as my 65th birthday was approaching about 6 months before, in 2021, I called him up one day and I said, hey, I wasn't kidding. You better start looking for somebody. And the day I turned 65, I turned my company vehicle, and I've been loving it ever since. I tell people Sunday evenings are my favorite time of the week now. I used to hate Sunday evenings. I just sit there and think, oh man, I got to do this tomorrow, and Hemsh's due to show up, and DP, and my big, I sit back on Sunday evenings just but I love the business. It's a great people in it too.
Yeah, you showed a picture of your father at Uniontown. Is that where he also chose to get buried, knowing he was a veteran?
Oh yeah, he's in the Uniontown Gap Cemetery. He was going to go, the home church, I had a story about my grandfather in the home church, but is up in Spring Glen, Coleman's, UCC. When you go past the Soliday School and past Shades Dam, and go down that little bit and turn left, there's a real little country church back in there.
Right.
That's where he was raised in a church, and all my Buffington and Copenhagen ancestors were in that cemetery. He was going to go there, and then he found out about the National Cemetery. In fact, his captain that I showed you from Virginia, one time they were down there visiting him, he said, you need to get a lot in Uniontown Gap. And that's all it took. And that's I'm sure you've been down there. It's a beautiful
Yes, it was.
And did you ever get to see the CB monument down there?
Yes.
Oh, okay. The CB monument is down there that, Mike was a CB. They put a monument up several years ago, and that's 20 steps from my dad's grave. I hope I didn't stumble too much.
No, great. Great history.